Hi, whether you can tell it or not, it's a beautiful rainy day here in Darke County, Ohio. We've got a little bit of a northeast wind going on here with a nice cold rain falling. It looks to be this way for the next couple of days. Since I can't do much of anything else, thought I'd catch you up on what's going on the farm. As I pointed out in the opening, it's raining and it's cooler today. Between Friday, Saturday, and Sunday of this past week, we had somewhere between 2.5 and 3 inches of rain. That kind of brought us up to a saturation point on the soils around here, and it was windy on Monday and Tuesday, a little bit cooler, in maybe 60 degrees for the highs and 40 degrees to 45 degrees for the lows. And then last night it started raining again with cooler temperatures. The forecast is for maybe 2 inches to 3 inches over the next 2 to 3 days, and we're going to have temperatures as low as 34 degrees. So you'll forgive me if I didn't want to spend a lot of time standing out there in the wind and the rain. So it's a good opportunity for me to talk about what I'm doing on the farm and what's done, what needs to be done, some of the concerns that I have. So I started out this morning by going to the county ag breakfast. It's the first Thursday of every month. The county extension agent here in Darke County, Ohio, hosts an ag breakfast. It starts at 7:30 in the morning and runs till 9 o'clock or so. Sometimes there's a scheduled speaker, sometimes it's just a forum of the people that show up and discuss whatever. I went there this morning. A couple of interesting points came up. One of them was a conversation that I had with an old friend who is interested in the wheat health and disease issues there, and we were talking about head scab issues, which we have in our wheat here, and spray applications that might be used and how they might be used here for that. There was a conversation about the percentage of planting that is done here in Darke County, Ohio, and the number that came up was somewhere between 42 and 43% planting might be done. Now, looking around my immediate neighborhood, and I'm going to call that something within a 2-mile radius of myself, my guess, we're somewhere around 75 or 80% planted on the corn. I know that I have planted all of the corn on this farm, for better or for worse. I have neighbors who have planted all of their corn and all of their soybeans. And I look around and I see some ground that hasn't been touched yet. When you're in this kind of a weather pattern, it's a hit or miss kind of a thing. I have a friend who has a fertilizer spreader who he's having some trouble with it. The spread pattern doesn't suit him, and for some reason he seems to think that maybe I can help him out with that, so he's going to bring that by later today and drop it off and give me a little time to look at it. So let's dive into some of the concerns that I have here. As I mentioned, I have all of the corn planted. On April the 24th, a field that was in my 10-way mix of cover crops, which included oats and rapeseed and radishes and annual ryegrass and sun hemp and sunflowers and some berseem clover and some phacelia, and it was a 10-way mix that I planted that into. And I really don't have a lot to comment on that particular field. It was about what I would have expected. On the 25th, I planted a field that is approximately 2/10 of a mile away from that field. That particular field that I planted on the 25th, that was a wheat field that I spread some medium red clover into in March of 2016. The intention at that time was for that medium red clover to be harvested for seed, but weather conditions and other factors prevented that from happening, so that medium red clover just ended up growing there. And this spring it was a pretty dense cover of that medium red clover. And I planted the corn right into that after I had terminated the red clover with a herbicide application. And I actually kind of liked the way that that looked. There was no weed pressure in that field because the medium red clover had pretty well choked out any weeds. And I'm going to be really interested in seeing how that field turns out because of the nitrogen contribution that the medium red clover should have made. And then on the 26th, which would have been Wednesday, I planted a third field, which is about not quite a mile away from the home farm here. And that was, again, that same 10-way mix that was on the first field that I planted, but it was planted on a different date. So the growth of the different species that were in that 10-way mix was different. And the oats that were in that particular field really took hold and grew really well. So as I planted that field this spring, I really noticed the oat straw as a major component of what was going on in that field. And I really kind of liked the way that that looked and the way that that felt under the tractor and under the planter as I went through the field. So I'm going to be eyeballing that to see how that turns out this year. I'm really interested in the way some of this stuff is coming around. The next thing I have to worry about is I haven't planted the first soybean yet. And when I finished planting the corn, there were a couple of days there where the soil conditions were such and the weather conditions were such that I could have gone ahead and rushed into planting soybeans. But looking at the weather forecast, I saw this cooler, wetter weather moving in the forecast. Now, the weather forecasts don't always come true. In fact, they don't often come true. But I saw this cooler and wetter weather moving in, and I decided that I would leave the soybeans alone. The way things stand right now, looking out across the field, I'm glad that that's the choice that I made. I'm going to let this weather system move through and evaluate. At the earliest, it's going to be about Wednesday of next week, which is, 6 days away. So at the best, about 6 days from now, I'm going to be looking at those acres and deciding whether or not to plant the soybeans. That leads me to another concern, because on all of the acres where I'm planting soybeans this year, I have a cereal rye cover crop standing there that is still growing. It has not been terminated yet. That cereal rye is out in head, and we get some sunshine on it and some dry weather, it's going to start to pollinate. And I have some concerns about that. The biggest one is some of the acres where that cereal rye is, where I'm going to plant soybeans, I'm going to plant into winter wheat this fall when the soybeans come off. And what I can't have happen on those acres is for that cereal rye to get pollinated and develop viable seed and have that cereal rye growing in with my winter wheat, because the millers don't like that. And when I say the millers, for you non-farmers, I'm talking about the people that buy wheat and mill it for flour. They don't want cereal rye mixed in with the wheat seed. And it is almost impossible to separate the rye seed from the wheat seed. They're a similar size grain and a similar weight grain. You can't make that separation. So what I can't have is that cereal rye growing in with my wheat. So getting that cereal rye cover crop terminated before it develops viable seed is a concern to me right now. I can't predict the weather any better than the people that get paid to predict the weather. That's one of the concerns that I have, and I don't really have a backup plan for that, because I'm going to plant soybeans onto those acres, and the only choice I have, if that does become a problem, is to not plant wheat on those acres. And that kind of goofs up my crop rotation, and something like that takes 3 or 4 years to straighten out again. I'm going to be looking at opportunities to get out there and terminate that cereal rye. That leads into another concern. You know, when these fields are cold and wet, and I have that cereal rye out there still alive and growing, when the rain stops, that growing rye will actually help dry out those soils so that I can get them planted sooner. So under these current conditions, having that cereal rye out there growing actually kind of helps me get those soybeans planted. If I terminate it and then I get a bunch of rain on it and that soil gets wet, now that the cereal rye is dead, it hurts me, because the sun can't get to the soil and the wind can't get to the soil, and it keeps it from drying out. The only help it gives me at that point is that the biomass of that crop and the root mass of that crop helps hold the tractor up a little bit so that I can get across that soil when it is a little bit wet. But, you know, I spent last spring planting my soybeans in the mud, and it worked out okay, but I probably lost some yield because of that. I'm faced with some of the same kind of issues this year. You think you want to be a farmer? This is what it's like. I hope that maybe some of the things that I talk about are useful to you. If they are, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. I appreciate the comments that get made. I learn something every time somebody posts something. I hope you found some of this useful. Have a good day.